Again, if you're looking for a deer-resistant plant that looks absolutely great in combination with that, skullcap is certainly worth knowing about. Oh golly, so many things to talk about.
Bob?
Yes?
On the salvia gregae, do you cut it off in the winter?
It's evergreen. If it gets too big and you want to prune it, early spring is the best time to do it, just as about as it starts to make its new growth. If you don't prune it, it'll ultimately probably wind up 3 feet tall and a little bit bare at the base. If you want to keep it more compact, cut it off, but do it at the beginning of spring rather than at the winter. If you take too much of the foliage off at one time, it'll drown and die over the winter.
I heard something like you prune it on Valentine's Day.
Works for me. Same thing you do for your roses. That'd be about the right time to do it. We're going to come back and talk about some other salvias in just a minute. Yes?
Can you prune it during the summer, because I have one and it does get...
Just remember, never take more than 1/3 of the foliage off at one time. Yes, you can prune it in the summer. You're sacrificing flowers, is why I don't usually do it in the summer, but you certainly can. Interesting plant, but not a super long bloom season. But this is Coreopsis, and there are a lot of different forms of Coreopsis out there these days. This, I think, is one of the showiest. It's one of the broadleaf Coreopsis. I don't know whether this is early sunrise or baby sun, but these things make a large number of yellow flowers pretty much throughout mid-spring on into early summer. Then they don't do so much through the rest of the summer, but if you're looking for something that will give you a tremendous amount of color early in the year. Now there are other Coreopsis. There's one form of Coreopsis that grows wild here they call tick seed. Why they call it that, I don't know. Maybe the seeds look like ticks or something. I would not name any plant I liked tick seed. But the horticulture varieties of Coreopsis are very, very showy. There's some maroon colored ones. There are also some that are just very fine, the leaves are very finely dissected is the word we use. They're kind of thread-like. And that's what they call them, is threadleaf Coreopsis. The blooms are not as showy as the yellows, but there's some very unusual colors out there in the sort of maroon to purplish colors. And again, where you've got room to grow a lot of different things that are worth growing. But if you want something that'll give you a lot of bright flowers mid to late spring, if you're planting a June wedding or something, plant a lot of Coreopsis because they're just trouble-free. You're going to grow really, really well. But for August, they're not really the plant that you're looking for. Let's see. Another very underused plant, Scabiosa Daisy. This thing is perennial. The disadvantage, it looks to me like it gets mildew about half the time, but the mildew never really seems to affect it. And this is a plant that you just sort of plant it and forget about it. And through a lot of the year, every year, there's a pink form, there's sort of a bluish form, and then there are a couple of fairly giant flowered forms. I don't think they bloom quite as heavily. But again, for something that you can just plant once and virtually never have to do anything else with, Scabiosa is certainly a plant worth planting. Cold doesn't seem to bother it. Can't say I've ever seen any insects on it. So you may see some mildew on the foliage. Doesn't really seem to have much effect. If you want to control it, you can spray with plant wash or corn water tea or something like that. But again, it's a plant that just is not really well known. Common name of it is pincushion flower. And just something a little different you probably haven't seen, but might very well be, worth including in a perennial border.
Does it attract butterflies? Or?
Very much so.
Okay.
Good point. The butterflies absolutely love that flower.
Is it full sun?
Yes. Yeah, it's happy in full sun.
I thought they didn't like the hot summer.
I'm sorry?
I thought they didn't like the hot summers here.
Don't tell it that, because we've had it, again, Roberta's had it in her bed for 5 or 6 years.
I had the blue variety, and it didn't seem to like the heat.
One of the things that goes wrong with some plants like that is we tend to feel sorry for them in summer and water them too much. If it didn't do well, you probably were watering too often. Now, you don't want to let it get bone dry, but that plant's pretty drought tolerant. And I have to say, most of the time when I've seen problems with it, people have rotted it by keeping it too wet. And, and I guess that's an important thing to say about all plants, is during the summer months, there are many things that may make a plant wilt. One of them is heat, another one of them is wind, and many times those two things cause plants to wilt as much as lack of water. And the temptation is, we look out and we see a wilty plant and we say, let's run water it. Yeah, pretty soon you're going to kill it. because the soil was wet and it was not wilting from lack of water. So always feel the soil. Anything that looks droopy, yeah, a lot of times it may need water, but go stick your finger in the ground before you water it, because sometimes you'll find the soil's wet. And if you just give it a couple hours or let the sun get a little bit lower, the plant will perk up and it'll do just fine. It's very true with this plant, which has to be one of my favorite of all perennials, and that is the Gerber Daisy. And talk about a plant that people kill with kindness. You want to plant that delicate little thing in the sun or in the shade and give it plenty of water, right? You plant this thing out in full hot sun, you water it regularly to get it established, and then you water it sparingly and don't do much of anything except throw some fertilizer out periodically. Now, the old-fashioned Gerber daisies grew about this tall, and when you go down and buy them at Travis Wholesale or San Antonio Flower Company or something, those are what you usually get as cut flowers. About 15 years ago, they came out with these little dwarf forms. They're very appropriately named. They call the first hybrids happy pots, because they were just little pots like this with the biggest array of just happy colored flowers on them. But plant this plant in a sunny area. Water it regularly to get it established, and then don't overdo it with the water. Again, I'll pick on Roberta, but she lived here in town for a number of years, lived out in Green Spring Valley, had a bed of these things out in the front yard that were gorgeous. She moved to the hill country even before I had a chance to, and I happened to drive by her old house maybe a year later. The people had done nothing for the yard. The grass was dead, the trees looked terrible, and that bed of Gerber daisies must have had 200 flowers on it. It was just sitting out there thriving. So this is one plant, don't kill it with kindness. But again, nice thing about this, it makes a wonderful cut flower as well as being pretty in the yard. And something that I think is going to come back, certainly something that I'm doing more of, I've got a long bed alongside of my vegetable garden, and I've just decided to turn into a cut flower garden, because it's so much fun having, you know, a vase of flowers in bloom almost all the time. You walk in and look on her desk. Out of her garden, she's got larkspur in bloom, she's got sweet peas in bloom, she's got, I've forgotten what else is in there. But cutting gardens are very, very much worth having, and Gerber daisies are great things to put in cutting gardens, because the blooms will last, get them when they're fresh, that bloom will last easily a week or 10 days, you know, as a cut flower. So plant your Gerber daisies, but, you know, don't kill them with kindness.
How often do you fertilize?
Most perennials I will feed about every 4 to 6 weeks if you want to keep them in ideal shape. And again, alternate. I'll use the Medina Growing Green one time and then use Color Essentials twice. Then use the Growing Green once and then Color Essentials twice.
Many colors on this?
Many, many different colors. Both single and double. Some of them very frilly, some of them very open. Yeah, lots of colors.
What is the difference between plant food and fertilizer?
The name. One of them has more letters in it than the others. They're the same. Plant food is fertilizer. Fertilizer is plant food. I guess you'd say one of them starts with a P, one of them starts with an F. I think if somebody couldn't spell fertilizer, start calling it plant food probably. But it's the same thing exactly. I use them interchangeably. I'm sorry if that's confusing in any way. Now, for those of y'all that may be new to some of our products and things, you'll hear me, at least on the radio, talk about Rose Glow by Maestro Grow, and truly that is a fertilizer that we found put more flowers on anything than any other fertilizer would ever found. But as we like to do, if we find something that's really, really good, we go to the people that make it and say, how can you make it better? And in the case of the Rose Glow, they told us, I don't even remember what they were, 2 or 3 other things that they would add to it if they had it to do over. And so we said, well, add those to it, put it in a bag, and put our name on it, and call it Color Essentials. So Color Essentials, you won't find Rose Glow here, but you'll find something called Color Essentials. All that is Rose Glow with some extra things added to it. And so, anyway, that's what we'll use 2 times out of 3 on flowering plants.
What did you say, what was the other that you'd alternate?
With the Medina Granular Fertilizer, they call it Growing Green, we just call it Medina Granular Organic. By fall, we're going to stop carrying it. It's the best fertilizer we found in a granular fertilizer. Why are we going to stop carrying it? Because Stuart's going to improve it. He's going to put more micronized green sand. He's going to put 2 or 3 other things in it. And then we'll have it in a bag that says Shades of Green Landscape Essentials, or whatever name we've come up with for it. So there are very few things that can't be made better if you're willing to spend the money to put a few extra ingredients. Again, our Color Essentials is the same price as Rose Glow, it's just better. Our Natural Solutions is nothing but Has to Grow that has extra seaweed humates added to it. I'd like to call it Has to Grow Plus, but he might, object to that name. But anyway, so the Medina granular fertilizer is what we alternate with it. But hopefully by fall,